Today we are going to study one of the most important concepts in modern literary criticism, Alan Tate's idea of tension in poetry. Many students become confused when they hear the word tension. They immediately think about stress, conflict, anxiety, or fighting between characters. But Alan Tate means something much deeper. For Tate, tension is not merely conflict inside a poem. Tension is the way all parts of a poem work together to create a complete meaning. Imagine a bow and arrow. If there is no pull on the string, the arrow cannot move. If the string is pulled too much, it may break. The power of the bow exists because opposite forces are held together. Poetry works in the same way. A poem contains thoughts and emotions, general ideas and specific images, logic and imagination, intellect and feeling. When these opposite elements remain balanced, the poem gains power. This balance is what Alan Tate calls tension. Today we will learn who Alan Tate was, what tension means, why tension is important, how tension operates inside poetry, how this concept helps us analyze poems in examinations. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to identify tension in any poem and explain it confidently in competitive exams. Before moving forward, remember one simple formula. Poetry is different meanings working together. Tension is the force that holds them together. Keep this formula in your mind throughout the video. Suppose someone says, "My heart is heavy." Scientifically, the heart has not become heavier. But emotionally, we understand the meaning. Here we find literal meaning, emotional meaning. Both exist together. The interaction between these meanings creates poetic richness. This is the beginning of tension. Very important question. Who introduced the concept of tension in poetry? Answer. Alan Tate introduced the concept of tension and developed it as an important principle of new criticism. Think of a rope being pulled from two sides. Two opposite forces. One strong rope. Similarly, different meanings. One powerful poem. That is Alan Tate's concept of tension. Now that we understand the basic idea, we are ready to move to the next slide and discover who Alan Tate was and why his theory became so influential in literary criticism. Now that we have a basic understanding of what tension means, we must first understand the person who introduced this concept. Whenever we study a literary theory, it is important to know the critic behind it because theories do not appear suddenly. They are usually responses to the intellectual problems of a particular age. Today we are meeting Alan Tate, one of the most influential literary critics of the 20th century. Look at the years given on the slide, 1899 to 1979. This means Alan Tate lived through some of the most dramatic periods in modern history. He witnessed the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War, rapid industrialization, massive social and political changes. These events influenced how intellectuals thought about literature, culture, and society. Tate observed that modern life was becoming increasingly mechanical and fragmented. People were beginning to look at everything through science, statistics, politics, and economics. As a result, literature was often treated as something secondary or unimportant. Tate strongly disagreed with this attitude. He believed poetry possesses its own unique way of understanding reality. This belief became the foundation of his critical theory. Alan Tate and New Criticism. The first point on the slide says, prominent figure in New Criticism and the Southern Agrarians. Let us understand this carefully. What is New Criticism? New Criticism was one of the most influential literary movements of the 20th century. The New Critics argued that when studying literature, we should focus primarily on the text itself. Instead of asking, what was the poet's biography? What political views did the poet hold? What historical events influenced the poet? They asked, what is happening inside the poem? They believed that the poem itself contains everything necessary for interpretation. This method is called close reading. Close reading means examining words, images, symbols, metaphors, ironies, contrasts, structure. Alan Tate became one of the major representatives of this movement. For him, a poem was not merely a message. A poem was an organized structure of meanings. And the force holding these meanings together was tension. Simple example. Imagine two students looking at Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. Student A asks, when was Shakespeare born? Student B asks, how do the images of summer and beauty work together inside the poem? The new critics preferred student B's approach. Their attention remained on the text itself. This is why Alan Tate became important. Alan Tate and the Southern Agrarians. The slide also mentions the Southern Agrarians. Many students find this term confusing. Let us simplify it. The Southern Agrarians were a group of American writers and thinkers. They believed that modern industrial society was moving too fast and becoming too materialistic. They valued tradition, community, agriculture, human relationships, cultural heritage. They feared that machines and industrial progress might destroy deeper human values. Alan Tate was associated with this movement. Because of this background, he often emphasized the importance of preserving cultural and spiritual depth. Poetry, for him, was one way of preserving that depth. Poetry's autonomy. The second point says, championed poetry's autonomy against the intrusion of the social sciences and propaganda. This is a very important examination topic. Let us break down the difficult word, autonomy. Autonomy simply means independence. When Tate says poetry should be autonomous, he means poetry should have its own identity. Poetry should not become sociology, political propaganda, economics, journalism. A poem is not valuable simply because it supports a political party. A poem is not valuable simply because it teaches a social lesson. A poem becomes valuable because of the artistic way it creates meaning. Example, imagine two pieces of writing. Writing A, vote for this party because it is good. Writing B, a beautiful poem using imagery, symbolism, rhythm, and emotional complexity. The first is propaganda. The second is literature. Tate wanted critics to understand this difference. Why was Tate concerned? During the 20th century, many scholars tried to explain literature using psychology, sociology, politics, economics. Tate believed that these approaches often ignored the actual poem. He felt critics were looking outside the poem rather than inside it. Therefore, he defended literature as a unique art form. Literature as a unique form of knowledge. The third point says, defended literature as a unique form of knowledge. This is perhaps the most important idea on the slide. Tate believed literature teaches us things that science cannot teach. Science tells us facts. Literature helps us experience reality. There is a difference. Example, science may tell us, human beings experience grief after losing loved ones. This is factual knowledge, but reading a poem about grief allows us to feel the emotional reality of loss. That is literary knowledge. Science explains. Poetry experiences. Science analyzes. Poetry unifies. Science separates things into parts. Poetry brings parts together into a whole. This idea directly prepares us for Tate's theory of tension. Because tension is the method through which poetry creates this unique knowledge. Connection to tension. Now ask yourself, if literature is unique, what makes it unique? Tate's answer is, poetry combines many meanings simultaneously. It joins emotion and thought, abstract and concrete, universal and particular, logic and imagination. The force that keeps all these elements together is tension. Without tension, poetry would become ordinary prose or simple information. High-yield examination fact. Remember this carefully. Alan Tate's famous essay, Tension in Poetry, was published in 1938. Many competitive examinations ask, match the critic with the concept. Examples. Alan Tate right pointing arrow tension T.S. Eliot right pointing arrow objective correlative I.A. Richards right pointing arrow practical criticism. Cleanth Brooks right pointing arrow paradox. William Empson right pointing arrow ambiguity. This is a frequently tested area. Remember the formula. Alan Tate equals new criticism plus poetry's independence plus unique literary knowledge plus tension. Or simply, TATE. T equals text-centered criticism. A equals autonomy of poetry. T equals tension as poetic unity. E equals experience through literature. Now we know who Alan Tate was and why he believed literature deserves special attention. The next question naturally arises. If poetry is different from ordinary language, then what exactly creates its special power? Alan Tate's answer is the concept we are about to study in detail: tension in poetry. Before we study the actual concept of tension, we must understand the intellectual background from which this theory emerged. Many students memorize the definition of tension but fail to understand why Alan Tate developed this concept in the first place. A literary theory is never created in a vacuum. Every theory is a response to a particular historical and intellectual situation. To understand Tate properly, we must travel back to the literary world of the 1930s and 1940s. When and where did the essay appear? The essay, Tension in Poetry, is most commonly associated with Alan Tate's collection of essays called Reason in Madness. The collection was published in 1941. However, an important examination fact is often overlooked. The essay itself was actually written and delivered earlier, in 1938. Therefore, remember, 1938 essay written 1941 included in Reason in Madness. This distinction sometimes appears in competitive examinations. The intellectual climate of the time. The first half of the 20th century was a period of enormous change. Society was experiencing world wars, political revolutions, economic crises, industrial expansion, technological development. As a result, people increasingly began to think in terms of science, politics, sociology, economics. Many critics started asking questions such as, what social message does the poem contain? What political ideology does the poet support? What historical event produced this poem? What does the poet's biography tell us? These questions became extremely popular. But Alan Tate believed something important was being forgotten. The poem itself, the target of new criticism. This is one of the most important points to understand. Alan Tate belonged to the movement known as New Criticism. New critics believed that literary studies had moved too far away from the actual text. They felt critics were spending more time studying the poet's life, historical events, political conditions, social influences than studying the poem itself. As a result, the new critics challenged what they called the historical school of criticism and romantic school of criticism. What was the historical school? The historical school believed that understanding literature required understanding history. For example, if we study Shakespeare, the historical critic might ask, what was England like during Elizabeth's reign? What political events influenced Shakespeare? What social beliefs shaped the play? These questions are valuable. Tate did not completely reject them, but he believed they should not replace close analysis of the poem. What was the Romantic school? The Romantic critics emphasized emotion, imagination, personal expression. According to many Romantic thinkers, poetry was the spontaneous expression of powerful feelings. The poet became more important than the poem. The creator became more important than the creation. Tate opposed this tendency. He argued, a poem should not be judged merely as an emotional outburst. A poem is an artistic structure. Its value lies in the organization of meanings inside the text. Example, imagine a student says, this poem is great because the poet suffered a lot. Tate would respond, that may explain why the poem was written, but it does not explain why the poem is good. The poem must be examined as a poem, not merely as evidence about the poet's life. This idea became a central principle of new criticism. Poetry as an autonomous object. One revolutionary idea of new criticism was that a poem should be treated as an independent object. A poem is not a historical document, a political speech, a diary entry, a biography. Instead, it is a carefully organized structure of meanings. Think of a poem as a beautifully designed building. When we admire a building, we do not focus only on the architect's childhood. We also examine structure, balance, design, unity. Similarly, Tate wanted critics to examine the internal structure of poems. Connection with T.S. Eliot. To understand Tate more deeply, we must connect him with T.S. Eliot. One of Eliot's most famous concepts is objective correlative. This concept is frequently asked in examinations. What is the objective correlative? Eliot argued that emotions should not be expressed directly. Instead, emotions should be communicated through images, objects, situations, events. These external elements evoke emotion in the reader. Example: instead of saying, "I am sad," a poet might describe empty streets, falling leaves, a silent house, a fading sunset. The reader experiences sadness through the images. The emotion becomes embodied in concrete details. This is objective correlative. How does Tate relate to Eliot? Tate's theory of tension works in a similar direction. Both critics oppose loose emotional expression. Both critics believe emotion must be firmly connected to structure. For Eliot, emotion must be embodied in objective images. For Tate, emotion must be integrated into the total structure of meaning. In other words, emotion cannot float freely. It must become part of the poem's internal organization. Simple comparison. Eliot asks, how is emotion embodied? Tate asks, how are all meanings unified? Both are searching for artistic control. Both reject uncontrolled emotional expression. Both emphasize structure, tension and formalism. Another important examination term is formalism. Alan Tate is often called a formalist critic. But what does formalism mean? Formalism means concentrating on the form of the literary work. Form includes structure, language, imagery, symbolism, irony, paradox, rhythm. Formalists believe these elements create meaning. Meaning is not something added from outside. Meaning grows from the form itself. A formalist manifesto. Many scholars describe tension in poetry as a formalist manifesto. A manifesto is a statement of principles. Why is Tate's essay called a manifesto? Because it strongly declares that poetry must be studied as an artistic structure. Tate insists that meaning comes from the poem itself. Structure matters. Unity matters. Internal relationships matter. This became one of the foundations of new critical practice. The poem as an icon. One of Tate's most famous ideas is that a poem should be viewed as an icon. An icon is a complete object whose parts work together. Tate believed a poem should be approached like a work of architecture or sculpture. Every part contributes to the whole. Nothing is accidental. Historical document versus icon. Historical view. Poem is evidence about history. New critical view. Poem is self-contained artistic object. This distinction is crucial. Tate wanted critics to stop treating poems merely as historical evidence. He wanted them to examine the poem's internal design. Why this context matters. Without understanding this historical background, the concept of tension can seem abstract. Now we can see why Tate created it. He was responding to a literary culture that emphasized biography, history, politics, sociology, emotional expression. Tate wanted to bring attention back to the poem itself, structure, unity, internal meaning. His concept of tension became the tool for explaining how a poem achieves this unity. Examination gold points. Remember these facts carefully. Essay, Tension in Poetry. Written, 1938. Included in Reason in Madness, 1941. Movement, New Criticism. Opposed, Historical Criticism, Romantic Expressivism, Propaganda-Based Literary Evaluation. Related critic, T.S. Eliot. Related concept, Objective Correlative. Critical approach, Formalism. View of poem, Autonomous icon. Quick memory formula. Tate. T equals text over biography. O equals autonomous poem. T equals tension creates unity. E equals Eliot-like structural emotion. If you remember this formula, you can reconstruct almost the entire historical and literary background of Alan Tate's theory during an examination. Before Alan Tate explains what tension is, he first explains what is destroying poetry. This is very important. Imagine a doctor. Before giving medicine, the doctor first identifies the disease. Similarly, before defining tension, Tate identifies the disease affecting modern literature. The disease is shown in this slide. Look carefully. The slide is divided into two halves. On one side we have mass language and propaganda. On the other side we have true poetic language. The torn paper in the middle is not just decoration. It symbolizes a separation, a conflict, a battle, two completely different ways of using language. Tate wants us to choose which side belongs to genuine poetry. Understanding the left side, mass language and propaganda. First, focus on the loudspeaker. Why did the creator of this presentation use a loudspeaker? Think about what a loudspeaker does. A loudspeaker broadcasts one message to thousands of people. It does not encourage discussion. It does not encourage interpretation. It simply announces something. Examples: vote for us. Buy this product. Support this movement. Join this campaign. The goal is simple. The speaker wants immediate action. The message is designed to influence people quickly. Why does Tate criticize this type of language? Tate believes this language is too simple. Not simple in a good way. Simple in a limiting way. It reduces human experience into slogans. For example, imagine a politician says, "Our party is good. The other party is bad." This statement forces reality into two categories. Good versus bad, right versus wrong, friend versus enemy. But human life is rarely that simple. Poetry recognizes complexity. Propaganda ignores complexity. The meaning of mass communication. The loudspeaker contains the words mass communication. Let us understand this term. Mass communication means communicating with a huge audience simultaneously. Examples: television, radio, newspapers, political speeches, social media campaigns, advertisements. These forms of communication have one primary goal: deliver a message efficiently. They are not trying to create multiple layers of meaning. They want clarity and speed. Example from daily life. Suppose a railway station announces, "Train number 12,622 is arriving on platform 3. This is effective communication. The message is clear. No interpretation is needed. Nobody asks, what deeper symbolic meaning does platform 3 represent? Because the purpose is practical communication. Poetry works differently. Poetry invites interpretation. Mass communication avoids interpretation, aims to arouse an affective state. This sentence is extremely important. Many students skip it because the vocabulary seems difficult. Let us simplify it. Affective state equals emotional state. It simply means feelings. The goal of propaganda is often to create strong emotions, such as fear, pride, anger, excitement, patriotism, hatred, hope. These emotions can influence behavior. Example: imagine a war poster saying, "Your country needs you." The poster wants you to feel pride, duty, excitement. The emotional response matters more than deep thinking. This is what Tate means. Literature is not propaganda. Now look at the second sentence. Treats literature as identical to propaganda or sociology. Tate strongly opposes this idea. He believes literature is not the same as propaganda. Why? Because propaganda has a predetermined goal. It already knows the answer. Poetry explores possibilities. Propaganda tells you what to think. Poetry invites you to think. Example: a political slogan may say, "Only this solution can save society." A poem may ask, "What does it mean to be human in a changing world?" One gives answers, the other raises questions. One closes meaning, the other expands meaning. The right side, true poetic language. Now move your attention to the right side. Notice how different the image is. There is no loudspeaker, no shouting, no command. Instead, we see a geometric structure glowing from within. Why? Because poetry generates meaning internally. Its power comes from its structure, not from external force. What is pure meaning? The image contains the words pure meaning. This does not mean simple meaning. It means artistic meaning, meaning created through images. symbols, rhythm, sound, metaphor, irony, structure. Poetry does not merely communicate information. Poetry creates experiences. Example: consider these two sentences. Sentence 1, the man died. Sentence 2, the evening sun slipped beneath the horizon, and silence settled over the empty house. Both may suggest death, but the second creates an experience. That is poetic language, a self-contained configuration of meaning. This is one of the most important statements on the slide. Many examination questions come from this idea. Let us break it down. Self-contained. A poem is complete in itself. The meaning does not depend entirely on outside explanations. Everything necessary is contained within the work. This is a major new critical principle. Configuration. Configuration means arrangement. A poem is not a random collection of words. Everything is organized, like a machine, like a building, like a human body. Every part contributes to the whole. Meaning. Meaning is not found in one line alone. Meaning emerges from the interaction of all parts. Images interact with symbols. Symbols interact with emotions. Emotions interact with ideas. All parts contribute to the final experience. This interaction is what eventually becomes tension. Withstands the closest literal examination. This sentence is one of the foundations of new criticism. Tate says a great poem survives close reading. In fact, it becomes richer when examined carefully. Example: take Shakespeare's line, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" At first, it seems straightforward, but deeper analysis reveals summer represents beauty. Summer represents youth. Summer represents temporary perfection. Summer represents nature. Summer also suggests decay because summer eventually ends. One line contains many layers. This is genuine poetry. The quotation at the bottom. Now let us read the quotation. In all ages there are schools demanding that one sort only be written. Political poetry for the sake of the cause. This is Alan Tate's warning. He is saying that throughout history some groups have demanded that literature serve only one purpose. Political purpose, social purpose, ideological purpose. Tate believes this is dangerous. Why? Because literature becomes a servant, instead of remaining an art form. Imagine a teacher enters the classroom and announces, "From today, every student must paint only trees. No mountains, no rivers, no animals, no people, only trees." What happens? Creativity dies. The same thing happens when literature is forced to serve only politics. Its richness disappears. Its complexity disappears. Its freedom disappears. Why this slide is essential for understanding tension. This slide is preparing us for the central theory. Notice the contrast. Propaganda. One meaning, one purpose, one response, one direction. Poetry. Many meanings, many emotions, many interpretations, many relationships, yet somehow it remains one unified poem. How is that possible? That is the question Alan Tate asks. His answer is tension. Tension is the force that holds all these different meanings together without destroying their individuality. Remember these points. According to Tate, mass communication simplifies meaning, seeks persuasion, produces immediate emotional response. True poetry creates complexity, encourages interpretation, contains multiple levels of meaning, functions as a self-contained structure. Important opposition, mass language and poetic language, propaganda and art, single meaning and multiple meanings, persuasion and exploration, simplification and complexity, memory trick. Imagine, loudspeaker is one voice. Diamond is many reflections. Propaganda is like a loudspeaker. Poetry is like a diamond. The loudspeaker sends one message. The diamond reflects many lights at once. Alan Tate believes true poetry should be like the diamond. And the principle that makes this possible is called tension.